People, we are back together, for better or for worse. And we are joined by a guest today. We're joined by Dr. Thomas Armstrong, PhD. He's here in spirit. Now, some of you after my last video, rather video before last, might be expecting me to do a critique of this book, but I'm not going to critique the book itself except on one little matter of contention. So what exactly am I going to critique, huh? I'm going to critique the entire normative culture, which bases its assumptions on a logical fallacy. So let's get into that first, huh? We're going to do some bottom-up learning today to get a full picture. Starting off, first matter of business, from page 210 in this version. Stay with me. This methodology of averaging takes us out of the range of particular individuals and places in their stead the idea of a pure mathematical value. The average of 12, 6, 8, 9, and 15 is 10. Yet 10 isn't even represented in any of the original numbers. It's a new number, something else besides the actual reality of what is given. In the same way, there really isn't an average person anywhere. The average merely represents a statistical artifact. For something that really doesn't have that really doesn't have any tangible existence, the idea of normal certainly has been invested with a great deal of power in our society. So what specific logical fallacy is this? Now I need you to be convinced at this point for reasons. Mathematics in and of itself is not physical reality. And I'm going to make a video in the future about this topic because I really think I need to dive into it. But for now, let's just use that as a postulate, huh? So, what is mathematics? It is an analog of physical reality. It's a tool we use which is analogous to it. Now, taking that analog and thinking that physical reality has to apply in a one-to-one way, corresponding with that analog, is something known as an analogical fallacy. And that's what this culture uses when it's trying to basically treat an abnormal, or even a normal, like this mathematical artifact, huh? So, here's where it gets interesting. In most of this book, since it's entitled, The Power of Neurodiversity, it focuses not only on the detriments of certain disorders like dyslexia, like ADHD, like autism, like depression, clinical depression, etc., but instead focuses on the strengths and the benefits. For example, with depression, there's something which is touched upon in this book but not quite expanded on, called Depressive Realism. And the idea is people who have clinical depression, at least on a mild level, can more accurately assess reality. So I'm going to read you this little bit and put it on the screen, of course. Research actually supports the idea that people who are depressed see the world more realistically than those who are not depressed. Psychologists have recruited groups of mildly depressed and non-depressed individuals and sat them in front of a light bulb and a button. When the subject pressed the button, the light bulb either came on or it did not. So sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. In truth, the button didn't control the light bulb at all, but individuals in the non-depressed group were more likely to think that they were in charge of events and had control over the lighting of the bulb, while those in the depressed group were more realistic in their evaluation of events. Okay. So this is actually the moment of contention I was talking about with this book. And that is that the studies in reference, yes, they might have touched upon depressive realism, and they probably did, but there's another possibility to consider here. and that is that depression gives you the ability to acknowledge where you have and don't have control, and it may be focused more specifically on control, and that's another possibility that we need to consider with those studies. And don't hastily generalize, saying that it has to do with realism as a whole, because it may not. Probably does, might not. I'm just saying we need to consider the possibility. Now, let's talk about other disorders where there are actually some advantages. So one thing, which I can definitely attest to because I certainly have ADHD, with ADHD individuals, is that they are very good at roaming attention, and they are very good at homing attention, but not so good at central task attention. So here's the thing. Roaming attention, if you're out in the woods, say hunting, or gathering herbs or whatever else, would make you very good at looking around at all these different data points out in the world. And then homing attention would make you very good at honing in on the ones that matter, on the food sources that you can actually eat and not die from. So, in an environment like that, people who are labeled ADHD now would actually be at a distinct advantage, But now, in this modern world, what's most valued is central task attention. And that's where people with ADHD basically turn their brains off. All right, let's just acknowledge that. Now, on to another example. Look, we're still doing bottom-up learning. Still learning, all right? People with dyslexia, although they can't necessarily connect meaning to individual phonemes, and that's what causes problems with writing and understanding the actual sounds and everything. What they are very good at, more so than the norm, is spatial reasoning, is visualization. Just another point. Now, that brings me to the main point, what I really wanted to focus on, okay? And that's introducing a better model for how we label these things or how we deal with them. Now let's think about something like the Myers-Briggs types, which I'm getting to, all right? I'm getting to you all. We acknowledge that in each of those types, there are some strengths, there are some weaknesses. And they aren't necessarily precisely describing the individual who is, say, an INTJ or an ESFP or whatever else. But it's just a guide work, a framework for us to build on, right? And they don't fit it precisely. So here is the better model and better approach to people who are labeled to have disorders or who are neurodiverse, neuroatypical. And that is to treat it exactly like you would a personality type, where instead of saying this person has a disorder called autism or whatever it happens to be, we say their neurotype is autistic. Where we simply designate pieces of a neurotype to get a larger picture of an individual, and do not use the analogical fallacy, treating them like mathematical points, or treating, and I cannot stress this enough, disorders as following an order. Something to think about, people. Now, I could go on and on and on and on and on about this, but instead I just recommend you actually read the book, okay? Great piece of literature, and if you have any other pieces of contention, either with a book, with something I said, with my disorganized presentation style, well, tear me apart in the comments section, Love, gratitude, subscribe. I appreciate you all. Done.